Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as usual by my boy Tucker Hazel.
Okay.
Not in the, like the homie sense, as though he is my son. I consider him as such, and I treat him as such.
It's
But
true.
today we are
Watch
not
any of our
father and
content,
son.
you'll know that, yeah.
But today we're not father and son. Today we are intellectual equals, and we're chatting about a game
Finally,
that
am I right?
um hasn't come out particularly recently, but
No.
gets goddamn re-released. Every time Skyrim does, Capcom gets an itch in their fucking trouser and they re-release the game of the day today. That is Resident Evil 4.
Yeah, it's
The
probably up there with like Skyrim and Minecraft and fucking I don't know, Tetris. No, well, no, Tetris on another level. But like as games that get re-released the most. Like this is on fucking everything.
it gets around,
hmm
if you will.
It got into our hands
Yeah.
and we played it.
We did play it, and it's a very good video game.
Yeah, it's a good game.
Resident Evil 4 is, I mean, it's got a legacy, it's got a lineage, it's got a pedigree, right?
hmm
Um, and I went into the experience knowing that,
hmm
and I walked out the other side not at all getting the game I thought I was going to get,
Same here.
but a game I really, really enjoyed in the end. Tucker,
Yeah.
top level Resident Evil 4.
Well, actually, I want to spin off that idea of not expecting or like not getting what you were
Sure.
expecting. I had heard that the later Resident Evil games were more action focused,
Mhm.
but this is kind of just like an Uncharted game with some Resident Evil, inventory management and like spooks.
I don't agree with that, but I
Okay.
see where you're coming from. I think
Mostly
that
it's just like
Resident,
it's so focused on the shooting, the action,
sure.
and moving from area to area. Of course, there's more exploration. It's more in depth than an Uncharted game, but I do think that its legacy is more rooted in the Gears of War, shooter campaigns that came after it than the Resident Evil franchise. Of course, 5 and 6 are in that vein, but those games are more inspirational to shooters than, in my mind, horror games because this is not really a horror game to be honest.
I think what's interesting about Resident Evil 4 is the way it kind of sits at this very particular intersection of a lot of different design philosophies and ideas.
Yeah.
And I think you're right in the sense that this sits in that late sixth gen window where where things like QTEs were really big when God of War
Yeah.
helped introduce them. When, the big bombastic storyline and set pieces, all of this stuff, a lot of it feels more seventh generation. It feels a little bit fresher, but at the same time, it's rooted in this more traditional design philosophy. I think about, your secrets and your upgrades and your shops and your saving at your save stations and having this more deliberate gameplay pace and focus that doesn't really hold your hand, that still feels a little bit more rooted in this sort of action adventure tropey experience that you'd expect more from sixth generation titles. So I think it's really interesting seeing it kind of straddle this line and seeing it, I think, succeed as the sum of its parts when any individual element of Resident Evil 4 I don't think is especially, engaging by itself,
Mhm.
but I think it's the way that the game comes together and the way that it embraces these modern ideas, these classical ideas, and has one foot, like you're saying, in the seventh generation third person shooter action title, and
Yeah.
one foot in like this fifth generation, early sixth generation philosophy. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so I think one thing that you mentioned there is the game's pacing, which I think is far and away its strongest suit. Because as you were saying, there's a lot of, specific mechanics in this game that have kind of just been, done better in future games. But I think that the fact that this game is paced the way it's so well and the way it is exactly the reason I burned through it in 3 days, I think.
Yeah.
One day I played 7 hours, one day I played 8 hours. Like it definitely hooked me. Even though overall I would say I'm not as glowingly positive on it as it seems like a lot of people are. A lot of people consider this one of the best games of all time, which I don't personally see. But I have to commend the pacing because you finish an area and you get a checkpoint, and the shopkeeper guy is right next to the checkpoint, and you're like, oh, I'll just upgrade a couple things. I'll sell a few items. Oh, I just have enough money to buy this. I'll rearrange my inventory a little bit. Okay, well, I have a little space now. What if I go into the next area? There's probably a checkpoint right there, and then it gives you a little bit of a story hook in and a little bit of something to pull you along a new area with an interesting design. And I always felt compelled to see what was around the next corner because this game just throws shit at you right and left, and I think it's very strong because of that.
Yeah, it's a game that integrates its set pieces into its moment-to-moment gameplay incredibly well and
Mhm.
creates just this really fluid experience that moves geographically quite starkly, moves
Yeah.
in terms of tone quite starkly. It makes all of these shifts, but the way that it's constantly propelling the player forward, I think makes it feel really organic.
Mhm.
And one thing I want to talk about from pretty high level in that you mentioned is the sort of aesthetic of the world. Um,
Didn't mention
this
that, but
well, you talked about you said something, and I started thinking about the aesthetic. I don't care. We're going to talk about the aesthetic of this game because I really like it. I think one of the strongest elements of Resident Evil 4 is the way that with basically different shades of brown and gray and a little bit of red, they're
mhm.
able to make this incredibly evocative and iconic world.
Sure.
I don't the game is deliberately muted, but I don't think this is the seventh generation gray brown fuckery that a lot
Sure.
of AAA titles fell into. I think there's a very deliberate artistic decision being made here, and it really spoke to me. I think that what they're able to accomplish in terms of visuals and in terms of immersing you in the world with so little is really effective.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it balances its color palette very well. I think for me, the strongest visually aspect of the game is those opening sections where you're going through the forests and villages, and you hear the villagers with their pitchforks and they're chasing after
Yeah.
you and stuff. That is my personal favorite part of the game, and I think that that's where the aesthetic shines the strongest. Because I think once you get into like the castle, which is fine, but it's kind of just a castle, and you get to the fucking essentially God, what's the island from Metal Gear Solid? Um,
Shadow Moses,
Shadow
maybe?
Moses. Yeah, you
Yeah.
hop onto the island and you're kind of just playing Metal Gear Solid. Like you're sneaking around and it's like default military base. And I think that the aesthetic certainly loses a little bit of its charm there. Of course, it intermixes it with a few things like giant fucking Salazar statue, fight in
Yeah.
the mines or the lava room. But like, and I think those are very cool. But I do think that it certainly loses some of its charm for me when it steers away from that sort of country, European country aesthetic with the villages and the villagers chasing you and stuff. And it mixes itself up, but I don't think it necessarily hits all those notes highly for me.
Yeah, no, I totally see that, and I think something that all speaks to is not only the aesthetic but the sound design, which I think is
Yeah.
really incredible.
Hmm.
The way you hear various cultists, whether it's the villagers or the people in the castle, mumbling things in whatever language they're speaking. Sounds
Yeah.
like some of them are speaking Spanish, some of them I think are speaking a made-up language or something. The castle cultists, so maybe I'm just dumb. I mean, I
Yeah.
am dumb, but
Yeah. Of
the
course.
hearing these things, especially when I play most of my games with headphones, so
Hmm. Okay.
hearing positionally where they are was really compelling and fucked with me a little bit. I think the guns sound great. When you get a headshot in someone's head, fucking watermelons.
Dude, the striker is my favorite, one of my favorite video game weapons, like being satisfied by it. I would just sit there and pick off everyone with my sniper and then go in and clean up all the rest with shotgun.
The striker is a shotgun, right?
No,
I
it's
think.
it's the rifle that you don't have to reload every single time.
Oh, I'm pretty sure that's the auto rifle because I'm pretty sure the striker is
Oh
it's the
wait,
big fucking military. It's the wide angle
yeah.
shotgun you
Okay,
get.
I'm wrong. But
That one's
whatever
pretty
the
tight
fucking
too.
yeah, what I guess the auto rifle, but
Yeah, the auto rifle, I
thought
believe.
it had a different name. Whatever. But yeah, that's what I was talking about. Also, the striker. Those were my two weapons that I once I got them pushed through the game with, and I also used the Red 9 for my pistol.
I think that's what I used. I had whatever the best 45 was. I
Sure.
had the best
Okay. No.
45 and the best 9 millimeter, and I usually used, of course, I saved my 45 rounds, the Magnum rounds, when I really needed them.
Mhm.
But I guess we could talk about the arsenal a little bit and the moment to moment gameplay
Yeah, I
opposed to the
think
aesthetic in the world being built. I there's certainly a curve in Resident Evil 4 where you
100%.
start the game and it's fucking annoying the way that
Yes.
Leon controls. It's really annoying. But I think once you hit that curve and you're down the other side, it's really satisfying and it makes combat really intense. At the
Yeah.
beginning, it feels intense because you kind of feel bumbling,
Mhm.
but I think you reach a level of proficiency, but the game keeps throwing things at you. So now it's okay. Oh shit! Here's a situation I can handle, but I'm still limited by my tool set. So I'm hitting those quick turns. I'm switching weapons. I'm doing all these things, and the aiming is a little bit stiff, but on purpose. Everything's a little bit
Sure.
stiff on purpose. And I think that is where the game evokes a lot of tension. I don't necessarily think it really evokes horror in very many applications, but it is a very tense game, I think, for most of its runtime.
Yeah, so I feel exactly the same way that you do with the combat. Now, I think the thing is that I'm coming at it from a place where I've played action adventure shooter games that are more mechanically sound in their movement and their gunplay and all of that. And so when I'm going back to a game that is dated because it's old and I don't think it's held back because of that, and I'm getting into this, and you're not really supposed to use the right stick for the camera, like
No.
honestly, you're not supposed to. And it took me a while to like get that into my head because I'm so used to doing dual stick controls and looking around the environments and stuff. But this camera, which by the way I do think is actually a bad camera,
Yeah.
although it's better because you don't have to use it. Like the game is naturally the auto camera with the left stick is good enough where you don't have to worry about that. But that jerky camera just pissed me off. It made me really upset and it gave me a headache, honestly, at first. But when I realized I don't have to use that and I can mix in my steering the character with sprinting and running up to someone and kicking them and pulling out my different weapons and hit the touchpad and open up the inventory. I know where all the things are, so I can just go bam, bam, bam. There's definitely a fluidity to it that once you hit it, you feel in control, and I think that's really great game design.
Yeah, and I think I also took issues with the camera. The camera is one of the only things in this game that I think feels legitimately dated.
Yes,
On the whole, keep in mind, we were both playing the HD remaster.
yeah,
I
on
was playing on
PS4.
PS5, but
Oh
it's
well,
PS4 version. I mean, you can't all be as cool as me.
mm,
But that camera is the one holdover because looking back at the lineage of this game, I think is so fascinating. The fact that this was a GameCube exclusive first and foremost,
mm-hmm.
and on GameCube, the C stick really was never implemented on a wide scale as a second stick.
Yes, of course.
Twin stick shooting on GameCube really wasn't the norm. Things like Metroid Prime using more tank lock-on system. That camera really was for flicking the stick around to see camera. And I'm surprised that that didn't really get upgraded for the HD version
Sure,
because I
yeah,
don't think a whole ton would have been lost by doing that.
yeah,
Especially since you can pull back on the stick and hit X to spin immediately. Like
180,
yeah, so I don't really think that it would have compromised the game's tension in terms of gameplay, in terms of movement. So I
yeah.
do think that that was one place where the game did falter for me a little bit. But like you said, you get into that groove a little bit.
Yeah.
What did you think about everything other than combat? Because there's actually a surprising amount to the gameplay.
Well, I just want to say one thing when we're talking about something being a little bit dated. There's one other thing that I do think is dated enough. It's not a huge issue, but it's pretty jarring coming from a modern perspective, which is the many cutscenes for things like jumping over a gap or climbing a
Yeah,
ladder,
sure.
or it snaps the camera to a particular position. You don't control the character, and that's something that they're on a fucking roll for the remake. So if they decide to do a Resident Evil 4 remake, that's the first thing that they'll modernize. But unfortunately, that game design philosophy of taking away the control from the player to do something like climb a ladder or jump over a gap has been completely ironed out. So
Yeah.
it is a little bit like, oh yeah, that's right. This did used to happen in games. Like you didn't just hit the button and go over it. You had to like lose control of the character for a second. So that I do think is dated, but it's not a big enough issue to like really take away from it. It's just one of those things that doesn't hold over, I
Sure.
think, very well. But other things about the gameplay, I honestly really enjoy the balance of the environments. I think they are just big enough to make you feel like you can look around for things, or notice that there's a bird's nest up in a tree, or look for the medallions in the graveyard or the village, or they might call it the farm or something like that. While still feeling like you can tackle an area pretty damn quickly. Like
Yeah.
they are small areas, but I think they are large enough with just enough exploration to feel satisfying and keep you moving at a good pace, even if you do decide to explore the environments like I did.
Yeah. So this game, one of the first things I realized as soon as I started is that this game is incredibly linear.
Yes,
This
100%.
is a very, very linear game, not only in terms of the way that they're funneling you through places, but in terms of the fact that some areas are literally tracks you can walk along and you can move a little bit,
Mhm.
but there aren't too many more large open areas, which I think is okay. I think that's just a particular design philosophy. And what this game does well to that point, I think, is mask its intense linearity.
Yes.
Because in a lot of sections, you're literally just walking forward as Leon.
Mhm.
And you're going to turn a little bit sometimes, but you're walking forward.
Mhm.
But But the way that the game masks this, not only through having the areas be interesting and be kind of weaving, but the ways a place like the castle has you traveling in a more circular fashion, the ways that they have these areas feel more interconnected than they really are,
Hmm.
I think is I'm not saying it as though it's like a facade, as though they're kind of trying to pull one over on the player. It's this commitment to linearity for the purposes of pacing, for the purposes of
Yeah.
showing the player what Capcom wants you to see. But they hide it in a way so I didn't feel like I'm just walking along the path they wanted me to walk. I think that was really effective.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I think I initially was turned off by it because coming from the Raccoon City Police Department in Resident Evil 2
Yes.
remake, which is just about one of the most intricately designed maps I've ever experienced in terms of density, in terms of connecting back to certain areas. I was like, oh well, this is kind of just an action game. But I do think that the fact that I did enjoy the pacing so much and ended up getting into the combat completely smoothed over that, and I was like, okay, I can get into this. They're keeping me moving along, so I don't feel like I'm stuck at any point. And they mix it up enough with boss fights, with on rail quote unquote on rail sections,
Yeah.
little ways to spice up the gameplay. So I always felt like this is linear, but they're giving me enough compelling stuff to not feel bored.
Yeah, I think a core element of Resident Evil 4's design philosophy is empowering the player and making them feel like they're further under the upper hand than they really are.
Hmm.
So we texted about this briefly, but like the ammo distribution is a very fucking generous in this game,
Yeah, it's really generous.
where it really is not in a game like Resident Evil 2 Remake,
Hmm.
which is something that evokes a lot of tension in that game, but also made me really fucking freaked out to play it because you're like, hey, here's 6 rounds to your pistol, Leon. Go fucking walk around. Mr. X is going to be behind you. Good luck. And in this game, you get a lot of ammo, but there's this sense where you need to conserve it. There's this sense where you need to manage your inventory when you kind of don't really to a great
Hmm.
degree, but it adds to this feel and this tension. At the same time, I think that the puzzles are, for the most part, incredibly simple. I don't really like
Yeah.
puzzles in games like this. I fucking hate Uncharted's puzzles. They don't make me feel
Hmm.
smart. They make me feel stupid. This game makes you feel smart in the sense that the puzzles, I think, push back just enough so you need to engage your brain a little bit, but they don't break the pace.
I honestly don't agree with that. The only one that is exclusion to that example, I'm not, no, I don't know what I'm saying, but
Exception.
exception. Thank you. That's a good word. I'll have to remember that
That's a
one.
good word.
Is the sliding block puzzle that you were having such a big problem with? I'm
Yeah.
fucking bad at those. It's completely different from everything else in the game, and I just fucked around until I got it, and that was the only time I spent more than 30 seconds on a puzzle because I really did find these puzzles to be infuriatingly simple. They give you the air of like, okay, you have to go find an item and put it in this hole, but the only way that you can go leads you to that item. And when you get back, it's like, okay, well, that's the only item in my inventory. So like, why doesn't it just go automatically? And why does it want me to choose it? Like there's
Yeah,
a
sure.
facade of that Resident Evil puzzle where you have to combine things together or put them in the right hole or remember where something is, but it's not really there. And I do think that they're a little bit too simple for the game. In my opinion, it kind of did hamper my enjoyment when I felt like I could just turn off my brain and be like, oh, I've played a video game before. If I jump over this or shoot this thing, then this is going to happen. And it did feel a little bit downplayed and generic, but I do think that that's not the game's strength. So the fact that those aren't fantastic isn't a huge knock against it.
I think the reason I like them more is because the game's not trying to be a puzzle game, and like you mentioned and praised earlier, the pace of the experience
Yeah,
is really central to what makes the game work. And I think that if the puzzles were more hit your head against the wall, then they would take away from that pacing. They would take away from a lot of what the game is trying to accomplish.
yeah, for
I think they
sure.
add a lot of feel and they add some more interactivity and dimension to the world.
Hmm.
And while I don't, they might not challenge you, and they really don't. I think that they add a little bit of variety and add a little bit of a moment to breathe in between these combat sections that ratchet up in intensity, and I found them to be nice moments that just add to the gameplay and give you a little bit more time to go slowly through the world, or have a narrative justification to go, okay, I got to walk down here, I'm going to find the key, and I'm just going to allow Capcom to put me in these situations where I need to reach this goal. The goal itself is not particularly complex. It's the way I'm going to
Sure.
achieve the goal that's more interesting.
Yeah.
So some of it is, again, this sort of recognition that the game that's being put in front of you is way more linear and way
Mhm.
more focused and blockbuster than you might anticipate
Yeah.
with these elements that I think wrap the experience in this exterior that makes it a little bit more than it otherwise could have been.
Yeah, so I actually do want to touch on something, and this is kind of my final critique of the game, but I do think it's pretty important. I really honestly don't like the just generic blockbuster feel that this game has. I think it's
Sure.
strongest in the moments where it's creating an atmosphere, where it has interesting lore ideas, where there's locales that are engaging. But other than that, Leon is a fucking awful character. He's a generic white guy action protagonist who makes awful jokes, makes no connections with the character because he's just fucking joking all the time, and doesn't say a goddamn word outside of cutscenes.
Yeah.
I think that the fact that the connection between Leon and Ashley is just only in cutscenes. Like there's a moment where you rescue Ashley, and then you go like 5 minutes of gameplay going through a thing where she almost dies and you get killed, and you start a cutscene. And it's like they just have like a normal like one-off
Yeah.
conversation. It's like, okay, well, technically you haven't talked yet since I rescued you. Like that's a little bit weird. And I also think that some of those pretty honestly pretty generic action set pieces like just took me out of the fact that this game is creative in other scenarios. And I think it's a weird balance that I was not particularly a fan of. But yeah, I just think the dialogue is bad. I don't think that the the story was handled incredibly well. I thought it was fine, but when it was steered away to those more generic action moments, I was just like, okay, well, I've played through this before, and it lost a little bit of specialness to me.
I think that's totally fair, and part of it is contextualizing when this came out in 2005, and I think
Yeah.
part of it is whether or not you find campiness endearing.
Hmm.
And I found the plot of this game incredibly endearing. I found the characters incredibly endearing because this fusion of the Kojima-esque Japanese plot beats where you're having a fucking knife fight and it's Krauser and Leon and they're slow motion twirling around each
Yeah.
other and slicing each other, and then you've got the fucking hoorah where here comes the attack helicopter and all of this stuff.
Oh yeah.
It creates this really, I think, familiar and endearing atmosphere that again is going to connect with you or not. And I
Yeah.
completely understand it not connecting with you. But I think these more Japanese moments, which you'd expect out of like a Metal Gear or something, in conjunction with this more westernized storyline, I found to be pretty charming. Of
Yeah.
course, it doesn't. There's not a lot of meat on the bone. I was
No.
telling you, I unironically love the fucking comedy of error moments where fucking Ashley will start running along and there'll be spikes behind her and she'll stand right against the wall where the fucking metal straps come around her to pin her to the wall, and the wall
Yeah.
spins around and Leon makes his dumb fucking jokes and quips and everything. I think that it's a texture and a feel that you either are going to like or dislike. I
Hmm.
think it's more at odds in a game like Resident Evil 2 Remake, where Leon is a bumbling fucking fool,
Yeah.
but that game wants to take itself a little bit more seriously. I,
Hmm.
I think the fact that Resident Evil 4 doesn't take itself that seriously, considering what it's trying to talk about,
Sure.
makes this more campy element feel a little bit more in universe and make it feel a bit more fun. So I don't know. I liked it, but I see where you're coming from.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, I would say that sort of generic actiony thing that and honestly, the familiarity that you were talking about was kind of what took me out of the experience. And I can see why it could be fun, but I mostly found myself just like turning off my brain and be like, yeah, I've fucking seen this before.
Sure.
When it came to those moments. And I think I also just preferred the way that Leon's character was handled in Resident Evil 2. Obviously, I played remake, and I don't know how much characterization he was given in the original, but I think that his characterization of being a fish out of water and having to adapt to the scenarios is a little more engaging as a character thing to me. And especially the characters around him in Resident Evil 2 are a little bit more engaging to talk to and to learn about. But when you get a lot of frankly one note characters, revenge guy with Krauser, a salty short guy with Salazar, a fucking damsel in distress with Ashley, I think I just
Sure.
sort of it felt like they could have done a little bit more. I think they could have balanced that campiness with a little more meat on the bones of it, and would have made that a little more charming to me because I'm not against campiness. Army of Darkness, the third Evil Dead movie, is one of my favorites, and that movie is corny to the fucking gazillionth degree, and I love it because of that. But I think that that there's a little more creativity there as opposed to this, where I think unfortunately loses some of that in its more actiony moments. It's the reason that might connect me.
I think
But
that also speaks,
oh
before we get
yes,
off of that point, I think it speaks to just how influential Resident Evil 4
yes,
was in terms of tone, in terms of, you know, plot ideas, in terms of a lot of different things. You can see a lot of this game's DNA in many seventh generation titles that follow it.
hmm
So I think that's important to note, and also just important to contextualize the fact that we're playing this now. And of course,
yeah, of
our lens
course,
is really the only lens that matters in terms of how we like it. Like, oh, you know, the camera, if we were fucking playing it 16 years ago, the camera would have been fine. It's not,
hmm
because we're playing it now.
yeah,
I think it's important just to think about some more of the narrative or some of the more aesthetic feel things from that perspective.
sure, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, I've got a few other things to talk about. These are all positive things. I'm done. Fucking yes. What you got?
I
What?
mean, I've got a big criticism of the game if you want
Okay,
to talk about
let's
this
let's
before we
go
get
with
into
that. Yeah,
positives.
sure.
I think that the bosses are roundly uninteresting, and I think that the difficulty curve in this game is a little bit weird.
Wholeheartedly disagree.
But here's the problem with the bosses. You can, if you use a rocket, if you use something, the bosses are done in fucking 5 seconds.
hmm
Literally, the fight against Salazar, you shoot the eye once and you use the rocket. Unbeknownst to me, it's like, I'm just going to do a bunch of damage. I'm going to front load the fight.
Sure.
But one rocket kills him. It's a game where sometimes it really challenges the player, not to where you're going to be banging your head against the wall, but to a disproportionate degree from a lot of the moment-to-moment gameplay.
Okay.
But there are some moments in here. There's some combat encounters. For instance, there's one. Do you remember the guy who got the fucking eyes stitched over? You can only shoot him in the
Yeah.
back
Ooh, I love
with the
that
big
fight.
claws. The first one is cool. You find him in the jail cell, but you fight him again, and there's two of them and a bunch of other guys in like a hallway.
hmm
That feels like a strange difficulty spike. It's a sort of difficulty spike where you're going to die once or you're going to die twice. But if you're going not dying at all to suddenly having these little moments,
hmm
or the minecart sequence, or some of these other sequences that I found were just, I like being challenged, but
hmm
I think when we're talking about a game of great pace, all of a sudden having these little blips didn't quite feel right to me. At the same time, when I can when I'm spending 3-4 hours in this castle building up to a Salazar fight, and then that Salazar fight is over in literally 15 seconds,
Yeah.
I think that there's a problem there in terms of balancing the scope and kind of gross and interesting design of these bosses with gameplay that I
Sure.
think fits better. On one hand, I think that a lot of traditional ideas about boss fights are pretty antiquated,
hmm
but if you're gonna do them, I think that you could have done them better than Resident Evil 4 does them. Some
Now,
of them,
oh, sorry.
well, I was just
Continue.
gonna say, because some of them did connect with me. The one where you're fighting Salazar's right-hand man, you're waiting for the elevator to come, and you're kicking over the nitrous oxide cans and freezing him,
hmm
and you can't kill him, and there's a sense of dread to it.
Yeah.
That felt like a fight that was a little bit more toothy. A lot of them felt really easy, like, okay, I got some first aid spray, I got my fucking rocket, I'm gonna be in and out.
hmm
Literally, in a lot of cases, in minutes, if a minute. And for me, that definitely hurt my enjoyment of some sequences in the game.
So I my one of my positives that I was going to go to it was the bosses, because I think that the bosses are where the game handles its creativity and its campiness balance the best. I was complaining a little bit about the campiness. I was complaining a little about the balance, but I think that the boss fights are so visually creative. The guy who
For sure.
fight in a burning barn, who his body goes up and it fucking
Definitely.
keeps going, and he gets a thing that comes out of his neck, and like and fighting it in the fucking thing floating over a pit with a lot of what do they call it? Like crates,
Yeah, yeah,
crates,
no,
whatever.
shipping crates, whatever. That was a
Shipping
great
crates, yeah,
fight.
sure. Or even something like the Salazar fight. I think that your criticism about the essentially the rocket launcher isn't necessarily fair, because that is a Resident Evil staple, that the rocket launcher is a one-hit kill, and I didn't use a rocket launcher on any boss fights, and the boss fights when you don't use a rocket launcher, and I know you obviously you only use the rocket launcher on one of them, but they are I found pretty engaging. They trap you in this small room where you have to, like, find certain areas where the weak point is, which are a little bit obvious, but I mostly chalk that up to the fact that I am an experienced video game player and I know what to look for in boss fight weaknesses and things of that nature.
Pretty obvious.
Yeah, but other than that, I found them to be really fun, and some of the sections that I enjoyed messing around with the most, because while I did feel powerful, it felt like, okay, well, I have the upper hand here, and I can mess with this big creature that's supposed to be intimidating, but it's campy and it's weird and it's fun, and I can dick around and just, run in a straight line, and it's bumbling after me, and I can do a 180, shoot it a couple times. I found those to be pretty fun, and I honestly, the boss fights are some of the highlights of the game for me. Although I do think the last fight with Sadler is pretty weak. Didn't like that one too much.
I mean, like I said, there are some that really did engage with me, but maybe that speaks to a larger issue where some of Resident Evil's design philosophies are at odds with each other. Because if it's a game where I'm supposed to be conserving resources, then I should take the most efficient route to beat this boss. And if the most efficient route to this boss is a 15-second fight, then I think there's a problem there on a couple levels.
Mm-hmm.
So while I see where you're coming from, I think that it's an issue of maybe of expectations, but maybe of the fact that, like you said, I really did like the aesthetic of these. I think it's really cool how they just, hey, here's a person and fucking boom, let's explode into this big gross monster. That's
Sure,
pretty
yeah.
neat. But then, like you said, oh, I can run away. They're going to bumble after me, spin around, shoot them, and keep going.
Mm-hmm.
That, I think, just feels a little bit off.
Sure.
It didn't take away a major amount for me from the experience on the whole, but that was one of the few overarching things that I took issue with in the game, which I, on the whole, really enjoyed.
Yeah. Um, Finally, I kind of want to talk about the shop system and
Yeah.
gun upgrades and the essentially quote unquote crafting system where you can combine treasures to make them worth a little more. I found that to be really engaging. I loved messing around with the shops and organizing my inventory to make sure I had space for things, and seeing what upgrades he had, and whenever it'd be a new thing, he's like, "Oh, I got something new for you, stranger." And I would scroll through and be like, "Okay, do I want this gun? Is this gonna be useful? I'm pretty good with mines. Do I upgrade it, or do I sell it and change it for something new, and then I can upgrade that?" Like, I think there's a really fun balance here between the amount of choice that they give you with. There's a lot of fucking weapons in this game, and
Yeah.
from my perspective, they're all pretty useful. And on top of that, I was never seriously strapped for cash, so I felt like I could, every time I ran into one, I could, upgrade myself pretty considerably. But they don't sell you a lot of. There's some health upgrades you can get. You can get a couple of spray cans from him, but like only like two, like I think like a total of like 5 or 6 for the entire game. So it's not like overkill. And he doesn't sell ammo, so you can't seriously load yourself up. You're just incrementally upgrading yourself. And I felt like that was a really fun balance that I enjoyed with that mechanic system a lot.
Yeah, I think it does a nice job scaling Leon's strength against the rest of the game as it goes along.
Mm-hmm.
But as you mentioned in a really brief fashion, it's the inventory management that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
I think encumbrance is such a fucking annoying mechanic in almost every video game,
Mm-hmm.
but realizing it in the way that Resident Evil 4 realized it compelled me in a particular way. Now, of course, it comes to the issue of Leon doesn't carry a briefcase.
Yeah.
So,
True.
like,
Upgrading his briefcase doesn't make any fucking sense.
like it's no, in some senses it's really not a lot less abstract than a lot of other applications, but I
Mm-hmm.
think that the physical act of having this briefcase, even if it's shoved up his ass or wherever he keeps his fucking briefcase, being able to rearrange things and actually having to fit them in was compelling, and a nice visualization of a feature that I find
Yeah.
frustrating in a lot of applications.
Yeah, no, I mean, I liked that the inventory management a lot when I played Resident Evil 2 Remake. I think that's one of the highlights of the Resident Evil series, in my opinion, is how it handles your inventory and you making critical decisions on the fly of what you want to combine or what to keep, or stuff like that. I think the combining mechanic is really cool. It allows you to save room in your thing while upgrading some things. And, you can make some decisions on stuff. But I totally agree with the inventory systems. That's actually the first positive point that I wrote on my thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's very good. It could use a little bit, I think, of quality of life. When you pick up an item and you've got things in your inventory that you could combine or something, but you got to put, like, you can't drop something on the ground,
True.
which I think would have
You
been
can
helpful.
discard it though.
You can discard it, sure, but then you can't get it back.
Yeah.
And like if I've got, oh shit, I've got too many herbs I should be combining, but I can't, but I just picked this thing up, so now I got to drop it because I don't want to get rid of the herbs. And yet there's some edges that could be smoothed out, but on the whole, it was a really, I think, very compelling system.
Yeah. Anything else you want to talk about?
I'm not going to play the rest of these games, I don't think.
5 and
Uh,
6, you mean, or just any Resident Evil?
I think I'm gonna go back and actually finish 2 Remake now.
Hmm.
What turned me off of 2 Remake the first time was leaving the RPD and then basically having a Resident Evil 4
Yes.
linear experience for the rest of the game. Like, I don't want this. But having now played Resident Evil 4, I think I do.
Hmm.
So I would like to play through maybe that one and maybe 3. And maybe check out
Sure.
5 because 5 apparently is like a really solid action game, but it's not what people wanted. But we've had this conversation. I'm a little bitch boy when it comes to all the horror stuff.
Well, a lot of
So
stuff,
some
but horror in particular, yeah.
sure. So I'm not gonna play Resident Evil 7. I'm not gonna
Hmm.
play fucking Village. But the time that I spent with Resident Evil 4 was really, really special. And this is a game I think everyone should try. It's
Hmm.
not a game that I think needs a remake.
No? Okay.
Um, but it's a game that I'm really glad I played.
I honestly think that the game would shine with a remake that enhances the visuals in terms of detail, because there are some things that do feel very dated in terms of the visuals. You'll notice a lot of polygon textures, have it come into a corner, or if you look
Sure.
off in distance, you see the skybox has like a crease on it, and you're like, okay, well, I mean, it's an old game, whatever. And like a lot of textures are super fucking low resolution, like ridiculously low resolution.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of some things, like I said, with like we were talking with the camera, or like I said with the small cut scenes that take you away, I think this game could be expanded and modernized in a little bit that brings those gameplay mechanics in a tighter movement and gunplay system, more modernized one, to the forefront, and would probably sell me on the game a lot better. I think that there are things that could be modernized, but we'll see. I honestly think that we are going to get one.
We
It's
are.
just a question of what is that confirmed? What?
Well, unfortunately it
Oh,
has
the
been
leak.
confirmed in a circumspect way because
Yeah.
of those ransomware hackers that went
Hmm.
into Capcom, which is just a gross situation all around. But
Hmm.
yes, we are getting this game.
Yeah, but I'm glad I played it first here.
Yeah.
Probably not picking that up at launch, but it's a game that I would like to play through that modern lens and be able to say like, oh, hey, I remember this system, or like this scenario, and oh, here's how they changed it. Here's how they modernize the systems in order to like expand the environments, or clean up a few things. I think that could be really cool, because I've never actually played a game and then played like a remake of it. Maybe like ORAS, but and Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but Pokemon games are a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean it'd be interesting to see, and I definitely give it a shot. But I think so much of the game's charm and so much of its personality and why it feels special is because of when it released and because of what it takes from what came before and what it influenced afterwards. I'm
Hmm.
interested what a Resident Evil 4 that isn't situated in this exact moment looks like. So we'll
Sure.
see. We'll definitely see. I'm more excited for my full Ashley spin-off game in the vein of Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, where I'm fucking going around doing things. But overall, this is my favorite game of 2021 I've played so far.
Only one?
Only one so far, but
Well,
we're
who's
off to a
counting?
good start. We're off to a good start.
Okay, well, I think that about does it for this review. Thank you for listening to us bumble and ramble about Resident Evil 4 from 2005. I just like including the year on there because I put it in my notes. Makes me feel smart, like I knew when things came out. But I don't actually. I just have it on my notepad. What your touching lips? What, you got something else to say?
Oh, no, it just had me thinking again about the fucking Capcom 5 and the fact that this was a GameCube exclusive.
For 5 months, 9 months, one of the two.
Not very long. Capcom and Nintendo had a fucking weird relationship during the sixth generation, which manifested in some cool games and then a bunch of games that failed. And Capcom being like, "Fuck this! We're gonna immediately bring Resident Evil 4 to GameCube, and we're gonna get fucking Killer 7 out of here. And we're gonna do all kinds of stuff." By the way, the gun called Killer 7, cool little nod.
Yeah,
Cool
that's
little
cool.
nod. But no, I was just thinking. I like to ponder the Capcom 5 from time to time,
Sure, yeah.
as one does. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, follow me on Twitter.
I'm not gonna ask you. I'm not gonna ask you to follow me. I don't have enough followers to care. So see you guys later.
We don't know how to end a video.
No, we don't. We
You'd
seriously
think we'd
don't.
fucking learn that one.
Yeah. I think it's because we don't have like a set script, or we don't like, quote unquote script, or we don't actually know what we want to say. We feel a little bit weird about asking to subscribe and like, because like, yeah, everyone does that. That's a little annoying. But like we could make one and it'd be better.
Gamers, we're signing out. Keep gaming. Game theory.
Misty is fat. But
Mine says California.
it says bear.
It says
For if-o, lefo, lefroor, for ifor,
it's mirrored.
fo, if f f. Oh, what the fuck is going on?
It's mirrored.
Oh,